Over to you, Dr. Sanjay.
Hi there. Good afternoon from United Kingdom and good evening to all our friends who have logged in for this webinar. Good evening to yourselves over there. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar on current concepts in drug and vaccine trials in the management of COVID-19. Just before we start with the panel discussion, may I request all my colleagues on the panel, as well as all our audience, to kindly put yourself on mute so that there is no interference. The plan for today is to have a panel discussion focusing on COVID-19, which we all know has been the headline news for several months across the globe. I would first like to welcome our panelists. May I first start with Dr. Pratibha Naidoo. Dr. Pratibha Naidoo, thank you very much for being with us today. Just to introduce you, Prof. Pratibha Naidoo is a professor of clinical pharmacology from Bangalore. She is head of pharmacovigilance unit for the government of India, and you have been recently very much involved in vaccine trials and also, more importantly, looking at various therapeutic options in managing patients with COVID-19. Welcome, Dr. Pratibha Naidoo. May I welcome my other very esteemed colleague, Professor Iqbal Singh. Good to see you, Professor Singh. Professor Singh is a leading personality in the United Kingdom. He's a consultant geriatrician from Greater Manchester. Prof. Singh, you have been a pioneer in ethnic health and diversity in the United Kingdom. You have been and you are chair of various national and international organizations. And we do welcome you and we feel privileged to have you among us today. May I welcome my third panelist member, who happens to be a very good friend of mine and also a fellow consultant colleague from Wrightington, Wigan and Lee Teaching Hospitals, Dr. Ashish Abdul. Ashish is a consultant respiratory physician at our hospital. He is also the divisional medical director in our organization. And Ashish, you have been the lead consultant for managing COVID pandemic in our own hospital. And you have done an amazing work over the last 8 to 9 months in trying to get the hospital and your patients and your staff prepared for COVID pandemic. Colleagues, there are 2 more panelists who should be joining us very soon, but may I also extend my deepest thanks and gratitude to Prof. Raj Murali, who is sat over there. He's a consultant orthopedic surgeon. He has been instrumental in setting up this webinar. And last but not the least, my very good friend, Dr. Shashi, who has been there behind the scene preparing for the webinar, and an anesthetist from Stockport Hospital. So while my other 2 colleagues are on the way, they are Dr. Arun Wadhwa and Professor David Baxter. Can I share a small presentation from myself to set the scene regarding COVID pandemic? So please bear with me while I share the screen, and we will then be able to move forward. I hope you are able to see the screen there. Prof. Singh, can you see that? Iqbal, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, I am, and that's fine.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Technology is always a challenge. So, as I said, welcome to the current concepts in drug and vaccine trials
Okay.
in the management of COVID-19. As many of you would be aware that the first known case of coronavirus traced back to 17th of November 2019 in China. This was a 55-year-old individual who is now been confirmed to be the first person to have contracted COVID-19. That was more than a month earlier than what we initially thought was the first patient to develop coronavirus infection in December last year. And it is within 93 days that the whole world changed from a mystery to a pandemic. I would like to share some of the figures with yourself so that it can set the scene for our discussion later today. This is, as of this morning, the total number of COVID infections worldwide. We've now crossed the 39 million mark, and sadly, more than 1 million people have died. And as you can see from the slides over there, the top 6 countries with the maximum number of cases are United States, sadly our own country, India, followed by Brazil, Russia, Argentina, and Colombia. There is not a single country which has not been affected by COVID in one form or the other. Sadly, the number of COVID deaths and COVID cases are rising day by day. And as you can see, the major change started around 18th of March. And as of yesterday, we have 383 cases of COVID per day across the world. If you look at the number of deaths per day, its first death started around 16th of March when we started collecting the data. And as you can see that April, May, worldwide was the maximum number of deaths. And unfortunately, the number of deaths continue to remain high. And as of 2 weeks ago, as you can see, there were nearly 5,000 people dying per day. We've learned from various research trials across the country, in the UK and across the world. We have now got dexamethasone, we got remdesivir, but I don't know if any one of you had the opportunity to see the latest from yesterday. There is some doubt being cast about remdesivir's effect on mortality. There are lots of trials happening, and this is just a sample of what the world is trying to find a treatment for COVID. National Institute of Health, European Pharmaceutical Review, and our plan today will be to ask our panelists to give us some insight into how effective are these drugs today and what are the new drugs on horizon for tomorrow. We're all impatiently waiting for the COVID vaccine. This is the only way we will be able to get a proper and a complete control on this deadly virus. There is some thought, and this is from United Kingdom, that the most vulnerable could get their vaccine by Christmas. The head of the UK vaccine task force says that it would mean that life would get back to normal straight away. Let's keep our fingers crossed. The Chinese COVID-19 vaccine candidate who received the vaccine some time ago, there is some update only a few hours ago that the vaccine has induced sufficient antibody response. And in China, I'm informed only a few hours ago that a city in eastern China, they've started offering coronavirus infection vaccine to its general public. With this, may I invite the first panelist, Dr. Pratibha Naidoo. Thank you for being on the panel today. If I may start with the lady first. You've been very much involved in pandemic. You've been very much involved with vaccine trial and different drug trials, etc. So my first question to you is, what do you think has been the strategy for COVID drugs, research and identification of COVID patients? Dr. Pratibha Naidoo.
Thank you, Dr. Arya, and all the panelists. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Yes, I have been involved in reviewing some of the protocols for drug trials and vaccine trials as the ethics committee member. Uh, Generally, the strategy for development of any new drug goes through various phases, especially for drugs like antivirals. Initially, there has to be in vitro studies. We have to understand their efficacy. Rather, I would say before that would be in silico development to see the combinations on the computers, how the drug targets combine with the drug molecules. From there, we move on to in vitro studies, then we go to animal models, then we come to clinical trials. Of course, at various stages, the required approvals are taken. But in this case, the pandemic came all of a sudden, and it was so severe that we started seeing a very high rate of mortality. As such, the whole world was looking at something which could come immediately for the rescue of these patients and reduce the mortality rates. In such a situation, there was so, of course, there were evidences, and people were trying all over the world to come out with new drugs. But the only solution that came into picture at that time was repositioning or repurposing of the drugs. Many of these drugs were evaluated in vitro for other viruses such as MERS, SARS-CoV-1, or Ebola virus H1N1. So, therefore, the drugs which were showing efficacy in these against these viruses were chosen, and one of them was remdesivir, and then favipiravir has followed. And there were some drugs which were already used in HIV, such as lopinavir, ritonavir. These antiviral drugs were picked up, and then they bypassed the animal models of evaluation. But however, they're happening now, and then they directly entered into clinical trials because many of them were already tested in humans. So safety wise, we were a little confident. And instead of going through the detailed phase of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 phase of clinical trials, the regulatory agencies as well as the ethics committees started giving fast track approvals, emergency use authorizations, off label uses, and that way we were able to bring them into clinical use at a faster rate. So compared to the other, the traditional method of drug development or research, here we were a little faster. However, the results, as you just mentioned, Dr. Arya, they are not very encouraging, but still there is an effort going on. But this has been the strategy, and the regulatory agencies across all the countries have not permitted a very lenient use of these drugs. Most of them come under emergency use authorization, where the doctors have to be, the treating physicians have to be very careful, take the consent of the patients, and then prescribe and be meticulous in observing the efficacy as well as safety. So this has been the way these drugs are being developed. That is one. And another thing is there are many, the pathophysiology of this COVID-19 is is at it involves various processes. There is initial viremia, inflammation, initial reaction of the T cells. Then the macrophages are involved. There is a state of inflammation, and then that goes beyond control. There is a cytokine storm of hyperimmunity, and then septic shock or sepsis. So it goes through various stages. So there is some amount of challenge which actually involves in drug development. So as of now, the research has been taking a lead from whatever was there earlier. And of course, there has been some modification, structural modification. They are studying the pharmacokinetics. They are coming out with proper drug delivery systems. So these are the various things which are still happening, but we are yet to reach an appropriate molecule or a combination of molecules.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Pratibha Naidoo. Can I
Thank
welcome, before I bring in Professor Iqbal Singh, can I welcome Dr. Arun Wadhwa on the panel? Thank you, Dr. Wadhwa, for being here with us today. Just to introduce yourself, you are a very famous consultant pediatrician from Delhi. You've authored various chapters in various textbooks, and you have been very closely involved with vaccine trials in the country, particularly around Delhi. So, Professor Singh, if I may have the opportunity to bring you onto the panel, I would really, say a big thank you to you for partnership with the webinar today in terms of CESOP. So, would you be able to tell the audience and the participants what the role of CESOP is within the United Kingdom? Thank you, Prof. Singh.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sanjay. I would like to welcome all people on behalf of the Center for Excellence Safety for Older People, and a special thanks to Raj and Shashi for helping us organize this. The Center for Excellence Safety for Older People was really established as a part of a national initiative to help us improve the safety of care. We realized that we could improve that with a focus on improving the skills and knowledge of our healthcare and social care workforce, of our doctors, our nurses, our allied health professionals, our social care workers delivering care in care homes, how we could make them more skilled, but also make them more confident in delivering the service. But the other area which came post Francis and post Winterburn was the need for embedding dignity, compassion, and respect within our NHS and within our social care. And it's a part of that we have a dual focus aiming to embed dignity, compassion, and respect within the workforce. Now, COVID-19, and I'll cover some of the areas in relation to older people. COVID-19 has had a devastating impact, as Sanjay showed the data. It's had a disproportionate burden on the older generation and the older people. In UK, 70% of the excess deaths have happened in the over 70-year-olds. 80% CDA figures in USA, and similar figures across Europe, with most countries showing a marked increase towards the over 65-year-olds. The biggest challenge has been the care in care homes. For instance, in Germany, the number of care home deaths is 0.5 per population. In Austria, even better, 0.1. But if we look at France, 1%, UK, we've had 7% of our deaths in 7% of UK care home population has died. In Italy, 8%. So even in countries which have done very well, and Sanjay, we were both at the European Congress last week and the Patient Safety in European Congress, which I chair, we established that every country, regardless of how they have done, feels that there is a blind spot when the nation has dealt with the older population. So what have we learned? We've learned that if we have to deal with it again, we will make sure that the care homes are fully equipped, oxygen, PPE, infection controls, that we need a strategy for care homes, we need a strategy for communities, and we need a strategy for care of older people in hospitals. Above all, what we have recognized, and a joint statement at the European level, is that we don't want it to be repeated again. that we want to make sure that older people have access to all forms of care, to drugs, whether it is dexamethasone, remdesivir, and Sanjay, you mentioned about the latest issues in relation to that, where that older people are a part of trials, because you know that the initial vaccine trials, there were not a lot of older people recruited on those trials for understandable reasons. But above all, that we understand and we mitigate the stress that people who look after COVID patients, whether it's in hospitals or care home, or look after patients and the apprehension that goes with it. We are able to understand that. And Sanjay, most of us will know we're on behalf of CESOP, and you may have had a chance to see the webinars we do in relation to support building and resilience, because I think that is one of the most important things that we've forgotten and we need to be aware of in terms of the short and long term complications. So that's the introduction from me, Sanjay. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Singh. May I bring Dr. Ashish Abdul? Ash, as I said in my opening introductory remark, that you have been leading on COVID pandemic in your hospital. It has been a challenge. So may I request you to tell us and share your experience of how you've managed patients with confirmed COVID cases in terms of oxygen therapy, in terms of drug therapy in your organization? Ash, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. It's a privilege to be there along with this esteemed panel today. Like you say, I've had the first-hand experience of managing these large number of patients who are presented to our organization. So primarily admission we reserve for patients who have either who are actually hypoxic on room air. So we tend not to admit people who are not hypoxic, and we triage them in A&E. Those we are sending back home, we send them with pulse oximeters to monitor them in the community and have a safety network whereby they can contact the hospital if the oxygen saturations fall below a certain limit. Those who are admitted, or we decide to admit, there's a basic set of investigations we do, but we streamline. We make sure a senior decision maker sees them on admission and streamline to a COVID positive ward. Now, we have several areas, Sanjay, as you know, suspected COVID areas, confirmed COVID areas, and those who have come back as COVID negative. So we have cohorted patients, so there is no, we reduce nosocomial infections. So once we identify a patient who's got COVID positivity, some of the standard treatments that we offer in our organization is once they're COVID positive, we definitely and require oxygen. So we have to separate those who are not critically ill, those from those who are severely ill and require admission. As we have already mentioned, we only admit for those who require oxygen. So we only admit the severely ill patients to our hospital. And once admitted, a standard regimen of therapy would look something like dexamethasone, which has been proven in recovery trial, one of the largest trial that UK Oxford unit has held, which has showed that it reduced mortality in patients up to a third, 28-day mortality, third of the patients. It reduces the incidence of mechanical ventilation and reduces hospital stay. So that is 6 milligrams once a day for 10 days. That is one of the standard treatment. The other treatment we are offering these patients is remdesivir, as colleagues have alluded to, antiviral agent. Again, like you said, there is no evidence that remdesivir reduces mortality or mechanical ventilation. It simply reduces the time to clinical course or resolution of symptoms by just a day. So the evidence is not strong, but we've been using it because some initial studies suggest that there may be a mortality benefit. Now, anticoagulation is something we use. We know that in COVID patients, between 12 and 70% of patients will have some sort of VTE. So especially more prevalent in patients who are severely ill, who go to intensive care unit. We also know that rising D dimers have poor prognostic outcomes, and those who have been treated with heparin have better outcomes. But there is no clear guidance or evidence to suggest how much heparin or how much anticoagulation to give at what stage. And there is several different pathways or modalities how patients or different institutions have decided to use. So so everybody should have prophylactic fragment. Those who are confirmed to have PE or VTE should have full dose anticoagulation. But it is those who are in between. And we have chosen a very practical way of assessing and managing anticoagulation in these. We offer twice daily intermediate dosing regimen, especially if the D dimer is doubling or over 1,000. Okay. Those with right heart problems, right heart dilatation, we offer full anticoagulation as well. One of the other most common things that we're using is antibiotics. Actually, the evidence to use antibiotics in patients with COVID is very minimal actually. Only 20 to 40% of people will have superinfection with bacterial pathogens, but yet everybody gets some broad spectrum antibiotics and there's a huge variability. We stick with those with community-acquired pneumonia antibiotics, so the Augmentin. The other standard, so these are the 4 standard treatment that everybody gets. And depending on the requirement of oxygen, we can escalate to ventilation when they cross a certain threshold. And we have set markers for those who would benefit from invasive ventilation. So these are some of the modalities that we use, Sanjay, as standard treatment.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience, Ashish. Could I bring in Dr. Arun Wadhwa from Delhi? Dr. Wadhwa, you've been involved in managing such patients. Can I just ask yourself, you just heard the UK experience. Would you be able to comment on, is the experience in India very similar, or you got some other treatment modalities? You are on mute, Dr. Wadhwa. You need to unmute yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling me. I was actually a last minute addition. I don't know if you know that Dr. Bakul Parekh was supposed to be here and he couldn't connect, so he told me.
And we are very grateful to you.
So, I'm a pediatrician, and we see only children who are not having major problems, so most of them are settling at home, except for a very few who developed the MSIC. The rest of them are doing very well. I'm not seeing any adults, and the only experience I have, I was relating to what Dr. Ashish was saying. I myself had COVID in June, and first week of June, and I was given remdesivir, the steroids, the antibiotic, and the heparin antithrombotic agent all together in one go. Day 1, hour 1, everything was started together. So it was quite an experience. But fortunately, in children, we're not having serious problems. And I have just now, at the moment, also almost 25, 30 children with me who are COVID positive. So they're all doing well.
That's very important, because what we saw, Dr. Wadhwa, in the United Kingdom in the first phase, which in UK was around March, April, May, hardly any children were affected at that time. But this time we are seeing more young children and more young adults being affected in the second surge, which started sometime mid-September. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Maybe because the schools have opened now, maybe that's why the schools are still closed here. All children are indoors. They're not going to the park. They're not intermixing. Schools are closed. So maybe that's why children are still less here. And most of the histories we get is the father or the grandfather gets it into the house, and children are the secondary contact.
Absolutely correct. And that is the risk here. In United Kingdom, we started sending children back to school. The university reopened, and we have now seen a consequence and a surge as a result of that. Yeah.
The reverse is more dangerous.
How true. Dr. Pratibha Naidoo, if I may bring you, I know you've been very much involved in drugs and research and vaccine, but do you think there is a magic pill for this deadly virus on the horizon?
I don't think there will be any magic pill as such, because this disease has, as we said, it has multiple components. So we cannot have a single drug for a single target. Unless we have, as you said, if it should be really a magical pill which can act at various targets, targeting various pathophysiological processes. It's not going to be that way. But yes, lessons learned from all this, we could, apply those and try to develop certain drugs which are potent antivirals, potent immunomodulators, and good anti-inflammatories. So and of course anticoag. This is a combination which is being given now at present. As far as antivirals are concerned, the efficacy of remdesivir and another drug called favipiravir, which is more being prescribed in Indian scenario, that is showing. But if you really want to have a magic pill, then there are certain challenges for the development of such a magic pill. One is the virus is not yet completely identified. It is undergoing a lot of mutations. We have to sequence and see what strains are affecting which part of the world, and then accordingly we have to do. Supposing we come out with a magic pill, it may not be effective against all these strains. That is number one. Though we have identified certain targets, we are yet to understand the complete structure of the virus and which are the active components which are working there. Number three, what is the reaction that it produces in the human body? The pathophysiology also we are trying to understand more and more. It's not the initial viremia alone, as we have discussed earlier also. It is the inflammation, cytokine storm, and then how the entire immune process gets altered. Therefore, there is a lot more to understand for us before we come out with the magic pill. And there are many more challenges. So I would say magic pill may not be a single drug, but it could be a combination of 2 or 3, which will target the different sites which are involved in the pathogenesis of COVID-19. This is my take on this.
And you're absolutely right. We cardiologists, I'm a cardiologist by profession. We are thinking of a magic pill which will have aspirin, which will have a statin, which will have an ACE inhibitor, which will have a beta blocker, and then we will live forever. So I hope people like yourself from pharmacologists will be able to develop a magic pill one day, and the world will be once again a better place to live in. Can I? Yeah, thank you. Can I bring in Prof. Singh once again here? Prof. Singh, you know that in the United Kingdom and even in the US, this deadly virus has affected the Southeast Asian population and the elderly disproportionately. Any thoughts on this from yourself for the audience? Can you unmute yourself? Thank you. It will take us many pandemics to learn how to unmute ourselves on webinars. We still can't hear you. Sorry, I've got some IT technical hitch here. Can the other panelists hear Prof. Singh?
Hang on a second.
Right. Iqbal, if you
still have a...
Right. Sorry, we have a Iqbal, we cannot hear you. In case you have muted yourself on the laptop.
Right. Iqbal, the best way is to get out and come back in again for a minute.
Yeah. If you can mute yourself again and unmute yourself, for Prajwal, if you can help us with this.
But Iqbal, just quit the link and come back in again.
Okay. While you're trying to do that, can I just ask, there are some questions here. Ash, can I just ask you one of the question people have asked, that how long does, once you start dexamethasone and remdesivir in the UK, how long do you give it for?
So in UK, it's 10 days of dexamethasone. Remdesivir is prescribed usually for 10 days, but the subgroup analysis didn't show a huge difference between 5 and 10 days. So if you absolutely have to give 5 days is good enough for remdesivir. But dexamethasone, Sanjay, is 10 days, no longer.
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Pratibha Naidoo, is it very similar in India?
Yes, similar.
Yeah.
Very much similar.
Sure. Okay. Prof. Singh, are you able to, For some reason, we still cannot hear you. Do apologize. You're unmuted, so maybe on your laptop you may have.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, fine. I've disconnected the earphone. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we were talking about the challenge of the disproportionate impact on older people, but specifically on the South Asian community. And that has been reflected across the uh, whole of UK and whole of USA. When we look at it in United Kingdom, we've got the data in relation to Black uh, communities, in relation to Asian communities, both in terms of morbidity and mortality. In USA, the data shows that the hospital admissions for Black population are 3 to 4 times more, and the mortality is 2.5 times more. In USA, the hospital admissions for Asians are 1.8 times more, but the mortality data for South Asians in USA is very similar to the general population. Now, this is a huge challenge for us because, as some of our colleagues were saying, we don't understand. So, what we have done through the NIHR is to ask for, we did calls. There are 5 projects, big projects approved, and they are looking at 2 clear things. One, why is it that certain groups of people, why is it that BME communities are more susceptible to the virus? And the other is, we were mentioning about the cytokine storm and the other things, that why is it that the virus appears to be more virulent, that when it strikes the Asian population, the mortality data, the morbidity is much more. So these are 2 areas where we've got a huge amount of research going on. And there are 2 other areas of research as well. But yes, this is really important for us to find out. But what, as you know, Sanjay, what we've done is that till such time as we can establish as to why we are more susceptible, why is BME more virulent, is to make sure that we do whatever is possible right now. And that is in addition to the measures we take, how do we make sure that we minimize the risk to the healthcare staff, to the communities as much as possible. And that's the risk assessment that is being carried out throughout UK, and share that with colleagues in India as well.
No, thank you very much, Prof. Singh. And people from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh in this country, as you highlighted, have been disproportionately affected. But the country and the NHS is doing a lot to make sure that they are kept safe. So thank you very much. Can I move our discussion to around vaccine? And Dr. Naidoo, you did touch briefly on the vaccine. You just saw in my introductory slides that China, in one city in China, in eastern city of China, people are already getting vaccine. Do you think that vaccine will be available this side of the 2020, or will we have to wait for next year?
You're referring to the Chinese vaccine?
Whichever vaccine. Do you think we will have a vaccine
No.
before the new year?
May not be. Before the new year, doubtful, because Indian vaccines have just completed phase 1 and phase 2 in spite of running certain things parallelly. Now they are in phase 3, and I think it will be too early, according to me, to see the vaccine before end of 2020. It may require some more time.
But do you think that India should import the vaccines which Chinese are giving or the Russians are preparing?
It depends on the data, efficacy data and safety data. We have to critically review, and whether only after we see that, I think we can compare and see which one. Whichever comes first is, yes, agreeable, that we have to accept, looking at the growing rates of mortality, and we have to prevent it. But how far they are efficacious and how safe they are, what is the percentage of serious adverse reactions, are we willing to take that much of risk versus the benefit? Until and unless we get the complete data, I think we will not be able to take a call on that. But yes, if it is going to be effective and acceptable risk, we should go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Ash, do you think vaccine will be available? I just shared a slide with you where it says that most vulnerable people in the UK may get vaccine by Christmas. What do you think?
I'm unsure, Sanjay, that vaccine will be available by Christmas. There is the Oxford vaccine group is, the trials are going on in the UK, and there's early promise. Early next year is more hopeful than on this side before Christmas. Early next year, I
Okay,
think.
all right.
We're likely to get.
Thank you. Dr. Wadhwa, and thank you for sharing that you were one of those victims of COVID, and it's nice to see you come back and come out strong and looking so good.
Antibody.
Right, thank you. And do you think that a vaccine would be available soon?
Very
From
unlikely.
what you know of?
Even after finishing phase 3 trial, we need a cooling period of 6 months ideally, which they have said, okay, we'll wait for 2 months. So we haven't even finished phase 3 trial. Then we have 2 months of safety data after that. So I don't think we'll get the vaccine before February, March. Very unlikely.
Okay, thank you. Prof. Singh, if I may bring you, because you are an expert and a leader in managing our elderly people. Do you think that, what do you think when the vaccine comes, and nobody over here is doubting that there will be a vaccine one day, what would be the challenges in getting our elderly people vaccinated against this vaccine?
Yeah. Thanks, Sanjay. Yeah, I think I very much agree with the views that the panel has put in. But normally, the vaccines to come into effect, it's been years and years. It's taken us 5 to 8 years to develop some of the vaccines, apart from the flu vaccine, where we keep having the mutations. This is one area where there has been a huge acceleration. There's been a huge acceleration internally, and there's been a huge acceleration externally. So all the bodies, the regulatory bodies, are making sure we get soon, and the researchers are trying to make sure we get it soon. In terms of, and the reason why we are getting a vaccine earlier is because really we didn't take very long to identify the genetic structure, which we had as early as 11th of January. So that made things much easier. But in terms of older people, I think the challenges will be very similar, but a few different. At the European Congress, we had a presentation of the mRNA 1273 vaccine, which is one of the first vaccines from NIAID and the NIH coming out, which has done some trials on older people, because some of the earlier trials did not include older people. But that's phase 1, and they're now into phase 3. But till we get the data from phase 3 trials, it will be difficult for us to be recommending to older people all along. But there are 2 clear things, as Dr. Pratibha said. We need to make sure the vaccine is efficacious, but with older people, it's much more important that it is safe, that it doesn't give them side effects more than the benefit we are going to get. And I think what we will need is this COVID, because of the limited knowledge of all of us and of our specialists, the public health message will need to be very clear. So that is the third part of the NIH trials, is that if we find the answers, how will we make sure that we can get a public health message to people that they take out the virus as they use? And you were talking, Sanjay, and we were talking about the BME communities, and how do we get our message to the older BME communities that they have confidence in the system? But I think if there is one thing that's going to help us, it is when the virus finally comes to our doorstep.
Thank you. Thank you. you're absolutely right that safety and efficacy are going to be the two most important factors in acceptance of vaccine all over the world. And there are still doubts cast about the efficacy of vaccines, and in UK, people are still reluctant to take vaccines in certain areas. Dr. Wadhwa, you wanted to come in?
No, I wanted to say that, because the tracks are so fast tracked now, normal vaccines have taken 10 to 12 years. The fastest was the Ebola vaccine, which was 5 years.
Yeah.
So here we are expecting a vaccine within a year. And all these vaccines which will be passed will mostly be based on immunology. So the efficacy, effectiveness, all that will come much later with time. We'll be probably doing only immunological studies and passing the vaccine.
Thank you for cheering us up. We were all patiently waiting to get a vaccine, but I'm sure with great people like you and Dr. Pratibha Naidoo and others, we'll get a vaccine soon. Dr. Naidoo, you wanted to come back on that?
Yeah. Yes, yeah. I just wanted to say that this immunogenicity of vaccines is something which we have to be really particular about, and we need specific neutralizing antibodies. Actually, those are going to be protective. So currently, we are targeting on the general most of the vaccines. So we need to have more development on those, and also the kits which are measuring these antibodies also have to be more sensitive. So how much of immunogenicity it is going to produce, and somebody has asked how long this immunogenicity is going to last. These are the two crucial factors or critical factors which are going to decide on the efficacy of vaccine. And since many are entering the market, I think that would be a competitive edge for a vaccine which is going to establish itself in these two areas.
How much T-cell immunity also is important. It's not only
Yes. So I now have the pleasure of welcoming our fifth panelist, Dr. David Baxter. David, good to see you, and good to see you that you are wearing a mask. Looks like you are working today. Can you hear us, David?
Yes, I can hear you. Actually, we're doing my team are doing a vaccine trial at the moment. We're doing a COVID-19 vaccine trial. As you know, there are 200 vaccines currently in development. Of those, 43 are in human testing phase, and 9 of them are in a phase 3 study. We're doing one of the vaccines that's in phase 3. We're doing a vaccine called Novavax. Now, as you know, there are sort of two general approaches to vaccine, I think. You've got your killed inactivated, which is what the Chinese have focused on. I think they've got 3 or 4 killed inactivated vaccines. Novavax is actually a recombinant vaccine. It's very much like hepatitis B. It's very much like Gardasil. You take the gene and you put it into a cell culture, and you grow a synthetic spike protein, and that's what we're doing a test of at the moment. It's a phase 3 study. We're looking to recruit about 15,000 people across the UK. We're just one of the sites. There are about 22 sites, and it's quite hard work. I'm hoping it's going to be a successful vaccine. But yes,
David,
Yeah.
No, thank
Sorry,
you.
Was I going on too much?
No. I'm just wanting to ask a supplementary question to you. Do you think you and your colleagues will be able to give the UK and the rest of the world Christmas gift this Christmas?
No, not a Christmas gift. No, not a Christmas gift. This is a 12-month
What about a New Year? What about a New Year gift? A New Year
won't
gift
be finished, I think, until. Well, I think Oxford. Now they've got a different approach, haven't they? They've got a chimpanzee adenovirus vector vaccine, and what they've done is they've inserted the mRNA into the chimpanzee adenovirus, and they're using that as a vector. And I think it's really interesting technology. what I'm hearing is that that trial seems to be proceeding and proceeding at a pace. So hopefully, my expectation is there'll be a licensed vaccine by about between March and June next year. Now, you could argue, of course, that the Russians have got an adenovirus vector, which apparently they're going to license very soon. I'm assuming the Chinese will have a vaccine that they're going to be licensing. I suspect it's going to be a killed inactivated one. But if you're looking at the ones from the West, I would have thought Oxford are going to be the first, and assuming that the study carries on as it's doing, probably the early part of next year. I would have thought that. But of course, the Indian Serum Institute, which is the biggest pharmaceutical company in the world, they seem to be linking up with several manufacturers. And to be honest, I think you probably know more about how the vaccines are developing, because you've got a superb company out there, haven't you, with Indian Serum Institute.
Thank you, David. That was very helpful. You sounded more positive than some of our panelists. I'm sure we can wait till March. You let me down by not giving us a Christmas gift, not a New Year's gift, but at least by March, if you're able to, the whole world will be so grateful to the collaboration between India and Oxford in preparing the vaccine. Can I just ask any of your panelists if they could? One of the questions which is being asked is reinfection, and I'm told that there have been a few cases of reinfection. So does having COVID once not offer lifelong immunity? Whoever wants to take this question, please. David?
Do you mind if I just... No, I'm not going to answer the question if you don't mind. I think there are better people on the panel to do that. Can I just make one point? I think it's really important that the present we give to the world is a safe vaccine. Or actually, I think we're going to have a series of safe vaccines. So I think it's really important that we do the full phase 3 study and we do the follow-up for a period of time to make sure we finish up with a safe vaccine. Sorry, I'll leave you with that.
Sanjay, can I just ask David a point? David, before you came, we were talking about the vaccine and availability for older people. Now, generally, there has been a view that the adenovirus vaccine may be relatively, the safety of that for older people is questioned, whereas the RNA-based platforms, they are much more safer. Do you have a view? Because the Oxford virus, the Sarah Gilbert-Steins virus, the adenovirus, the mRNA, the NIH is RNA-based platform. Do you have a view on that?
David, were you able to capture the question? Right. Looks like there's some technology glitch there. Oh yeah, please.
I didn't quite hear the question.
Iqbal, do you want to just repeat the question in short?
David, was that the Oxford virus is an adeno-based, mRNA viruses are RNA-based, and there has been a view that the RNA viruses may be much more safer for older people using the RNA platform, the vaccines. Do you have a view on the safety of a vaccine that has an RNA platform or an adeno platform?
So I think what you're asking me, and I apologize if I couldn't quite hear it. I think you're asking me, which do I think is the safer technology? I don't know enough about the results from the Oxford vaccine or the Johnson & Johnson. The Johnson & Johnson uses a human adenovirus. Of course, The Oxford one uses a chimpanzee one. I think one of the things I would say, the Novavax that we're using is using what I would recombinant technology. Now, recombinant technology has been used for probably 25, nearly 30 years. We use it for hepatitis B, we use it for Gardasil, and we use it for meningitis B vaccine. I think this is a very tried and tested technology. And I'd be looking at the different vaccines, and I'd be saying, I'm really keen to see what Oxford and Johnson & Johnson are. I think they're very good vaccines. I think the technology is brilliant. But I also think that using recombinant technology, which we've had for 25 years, it's we know it works for Hep B. We know it's safe. I'm hopeful that this recombinant technology that we're using for Novavax will actually prove to be both safe and effective, because that's the key thing. It's got to be safe and effective.
Yeah, that's correct. No, thank you, David. Dr. Wadhwa was also emphasizing the same thing. Safety and efficacy is important, and you're absolutely right. We should not be rushing. We need to make sure the vaccine is safe and effective. Yeah. Can I just ask? There's a question, Ash, for yourselves. That
I completely agree with that. Got to be safe.
Yes, that's correct. Ash, can you hear me? The question is.
I completely agree with you. Great.
Yeah. Ash, the question for you, and we got only a couple more minutes left. One of the colleagues have asked. No, I'm asking another panelist a question, David. The question is, how do you decide who to admit, especially the older people? Do you use frailty score? Sorry, it looks like.
So I think that was that question directed at me, and I think if it was who do you think you would give the vaccine to? And to be honest, I would give the vaccine to people like me, relatively old people who've also got comorbidity, and I think we should be looking to use the vaccine amongst them, 65 and over, particularly those with risk factors. And I think I'd also be looking to use it in under 65 at risk. I'd be wanting to make sure we have good representation from our Black, Asian and ethnic minority communities, because they seem to be experiencing quite a lot of disease, and probably healthcare workers. Those would be the first groups of people I would be looking at. I hope I'm not monopolizing the conversation. So if I am, I do apologize, but
it's okay, David. David, you answered a very important question. Ash, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Sanjay. Sorry.
Ash, question was, how do you assess the need for admission for older people?
I don't think we discriminate or have any separate admission criteria for older people. So if you're purely based on clinical reasons, it is still somebody who's got severe illness, who's requiring oxygen, would be the admission criteria. Clearly, in older people, there's other comorbidities which may tilt you towards admission, but we are quite conscious that hospitals may not be a safest place for people to be at this point. So we always do safety net. We do send people with pulse oximeters, so that we can monitor them even if they're in the community. So I would say symptoms suggestive of COVID, which is new onset cough, fever or high grade, or chest X-ray changes, which may suggest COVID, with oxygen requirements, which indicate severity of illness, would merit a hospital admission.
Yeah, and one of the question is, when do you decide enough is enough in treating older patients? Iqbal, could I bring you in there? Do you use frailty score in deciding level of treatment?
Sanjay, 2 points in terms of who will get the vaccine or who should get the vaccine out of the older people. I think David really picked up the 3 clear points. We say, look at age, look at multiple morbidity, at least 3 morbidities, and look at the frailties greater than 5. And these are the people who should get it first when we have limited stock. And then we have healthcare workers who are second in line, and social care workers. In terms of the risk factors, the three risk factors we've identified for older people who will do unfortunately the worst are the ones with high frailty scores and the ones with morbidities more than three morbidities. So we have to therefore be able to make a judgment when is it right for us to be very heroic, use ventilators, and when is it right for us to try non-invasive techniques. But that again, Sanjay, maybe we are approaching towards the end and we don't miss this issue. That really places a huge burden on our healthcare workforce, on our doctors, having to make judgments and decisions which are really changing lives, prolonging lives, ending lives. And the short-term impact of that and the long-term impact of that is really huge. And it's right that we acknowledge that and we make sure that what we need to do to prevent that ethical issue.
Thank you. There has been a request that we extend this webinar by 15 minutes. And that's the request. So that is very good. Dr. Naidoo, if I can come to you, one of the questions raised is, what is the role of plasma therapy? And is that a treatment that we should be utilizing in managing severely ill patients?
Yes. Actually, plasma therapy is proving to be one of the effective strategies for managing COVID-19. And in the last 3 to 4 months, especially in India, we have evolved certain guidelines. And just yesterday, one protocol has come from Indian Transfusion Medicine Society. So this plasma therapy is basically giving convalescent plasma from people who have recovered from COVID-19. And initially, the early results of ICMR trial showed that they were not effective. But over a period of time, it has been observed that there are certain criteria to choose the donor. So the donor should have adequate titer of these neutralizing antibodies. And it is proposed now in our national protocol that it should be 1 in 640. That is the non-specific antibodies. But recently, Beckman has come out with a machine which measures specific SARS-CoV antibody, which is against spike protein. So that should be more than 12 is what is recommended by Mayo Clinic. They started very good trial on plasma therapy. So when these conditions are fulfilled, patient who is recovered, that is 28 days after he is first diagnosed, and weight should be above 50. If it is female, it should be nulliparous. These are certain criteria. So when these are followed, certainly they are finding that it's going to be effective. In Bangalore, there is a group from HCG Cancer Institute, which has tied up with the government Victoria Hospital, and they have evaluated in more than 200 patients, and initial results are very promising. So with the time, the testing of neutralizing antibodies has evolved, and with that, they have come out with the good donors. I mean, the good quality of the donor's plasma, because of which plasma therapy is coming out as an effective modality. And the time when convalescent plasma has to be given, that also the doctors are of the opinion that in the moderate stage, or you can say category B, at that stage when we are initiating with remdesivir, early moderate stage, that would be the ideal time to introduce plasma therapy, because remdesivir is an antiviral drug and convalescent plasma will complement or supplement the action of remdesivir. And with that, I'm sure many people, but very few trials are happening now. On the CTRI website, of course, we found people from Chennai, people from UP and Delhi. I think we have some trials happening on convalescent plasma, but these have to be adhered to. As long as we adhere to this and it's well designed, I think we will come out with good results. I mean, the results may be true results and efficacy will be established. This is my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Ash, if I may ask you, have you had much experience of using plasma therapy in your own clinical practice or anywhere in the UK?
Yeah. In UK, unfortunately, the plasma therapy is only used as a part of clinical trial. Recovery standardizes most patients to, there is randomization to plasma therapy as well as one of the other treatment arms. There is a lot of isolated reports of single center studies which have suggested plasma therapy may be effective, but it is not part of standard treatment in UK, and it is not part of any guidelines here in the UK. We are awaiting further trial results before recommending it standard treatment.
Okay, thank you. Prof. Singh, I know you need to leave in a few minutes. Just before you leave, any final thoughts from yourself to our audience?
No, thanks very much, Sanjay. Just to say that the two areas that we're doing research on, as I said, was the susceptibility and the virulence. But what we haven't forgotten is that the two other areas are public health message and the short-term and long-term mental health impact. And we need to be aware, and we need to provide support as we do, and we need to have mechanisms of support for people who can share this. So thanks very much. It looks to have been a really excellent hour and a bit. Thank you very much, Sanjay.
Thank you, Iqbal. Thank you very much. Can I bring in Dr. Wadhwa? Dr. Arun Wadhwa, when you were ill, you braved it, you recovered. There is a chat in here. Would you have preferred dexamethasone and remdesivir, or would you have preferred a herbal treatment?
When you are a patient, you should behave like a patient. So I went there. I just went and they started everything, like I told you, oxygen, remdesivir, dexamethasone, everything, antibiotics, the antithrombotic. So, I would any day prefer allopathic form of treatment for which we are trained, for which we have scientific evidence, for which we can measure what we are doing. Herbal treatments are all anecdotal, maybe sitting at home, just doing nothing, so you can do that, but I'll definitely not do that.
Right, okay.
Question, one very interesting question we missed out. The one was the recurrence, the repeat attacks.
Yeah, so, reinfection. Yeah, please.
Dr. Baxter was there. So, I wanted to say something there that, these reinfection cases have been coming up every now and then all across the world. And now the total number of patients, if you see, are closing to 1 billion. And even if you have 100 people who had a second attack, it's not much, and this all actually happens in all viral infections, even like simple things like chickenpox. People say once you get it, you never get it, but still there are people who do get it once in a while, again, second, third episodes. So the interesting thing will be to see all these patients who had second episodes, whether they actually developed antibodies or not. So we should ideally test everybody after an attack, whether they've got antibodies. If they have reinfection, see whether the antibodies went down or not. And some people don't form antibodies in first go to all viral infections. So it's actually interesting, but these cases are still very few as compared to the total number of cases we've had across the world.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Pratibha Naidoo, can I just ask yourself that, do you think there should be a mass testing program? We test everybody and isolate those who are positive to prevent cross-infection?
Yes, I do agree.
You do agree?
I think that would be because as I heard yesterday, with changing seasons, there could be another second peak of coronavirus. So I think that would be. But how far it is feasible in considering from various angles, that also we have to see. Ideally, yes, that would be a most effective measure to prevent the transmission.
Okay, thank you very much. Ash, could I? What are your views on mass testing in healthcare setting?
So I would refer to a paper in Thorax which has been published, which says up to 30% of individuals, so healthcare individuals who were not showing any signs of disease at any point were seropositive for antibodies. That means there is at least 30% of individuals at any time within the healthcare setting who are asymptomatic carriers, and these were highest in the domestic or the cleaning people who offer the cleaning, people in acute medicine, and the lowest proportion of patients, lowest proportion of individuals who are found to be asymptomatic carriers were those who worked in intensive care units, because they are very well protected. They have PPE and full masks. So I think it is a very good strategy to find out and prevent nosocomial infection.
We can't hear you, Dr. Sanjay.
You
No.
got muted.
Dr. Sanjay, you're
Sorry,
muted.
it's me this time. Do apologize. So we need to bring the webinar to a close. But before I do that, can I have some final words of wisdom from you, Dr. Pratibha Naidoo first, and then Dr. Arun Wadhwa. Dr. Naidoo first.
Yeah. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share our views. So, COVID treatment strategies are going on as in a way where we don't have actually enough evidence. As of now, based on the solidarity trial of WHO, nothing is working. The best would be to continue the standard of care and continue with steroids. And as you said, mass screening, and people should follow certain healthy lifestyle, good sleep, good nourishment, free from anxiety. These are various measures that would support the drug treatment at any stage, whether they are asymptomatic positive or mild or moderate or severe. Drug therapy is certainly helping in some way. In an Indian scenario, we have very less number of publications, good doctors, but the reports carry a lot of weightage, and a lot of discussions on the YouTube, etc., are changing the way the treatment is happening. The government is taking, once yesterday it has been shown after this WHO solidarity trial, our Indian government is planning to introduce some new drugs or immunomodulators. They are going to start some new clinical trials and bring out a change in the national protocol. I think that would take us in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pratibha. Dr. Arun Wadhwa and Dr. Ashish, after that, your final words.
Yeah, so I would say that, like you mentioned in the beginning, people are waiting for the vaccine. I don't think we all keep telling our patients, don't think that will be the last and final thing. We don't even know the efficacy. Suppose it's 50-60% efficacy, the disease may still spread. So it has to be more than 70-80%. The vaccine maximum it will do probably is to reduce the mortality. If it does that, that's also good enough. Until we actually have a perfect vaccine, which may take longer. And if you ask me, a perfect vaccine would be a live attenuated nasal spray multi-dose vaccine. Just keep spraying nasal spray. That will prevent transmission also. Much easier to give, live attenuated, but that will be the longest to come because live vaccines take longest. Until then, we have to take care of yourselves, and the best vaccine which is available already, we should use that, which is wearing a mask, washing hands, safe distance. Don't poke your finger inside your mask and stay away from elders.
Thank you, Dr. Wadhwa. You stole my final words, and how right you are. Thank you very much. Dr. Ashish, Abdul Ashish, your final words on before we finish, Ash. You're on mute. You're still on mute. Looks like
moving target.
Yeah.
Understand very little about the disease condition itself. The drug therapy is also very valuable, and the evidence base is emerging. Therefore, I think it will be, we as clinicians should be constantly appraised of the evidence and offer treatments based on individual or on the knowledge of what is right for the individual. For example, I wouldn't recommend steroids to somebody who's not severely ill. The drug trials all have been done where subgroup analysis have shown it is actually not beneficial. So we have to be mindful.
Okay. Looks like we have lost Ash. David, are you able to hear us and want to share your final thoughts before we close the webinar? You're on mute. Technology can be such a factor to bring people together, but it can sometimes be challenging too. David, looks like you've unmuted yourself. Can you hear us?
Yes, I managed to get back in. I'm sorry, I got thrown out. I did hear you say you're closing, so that's fine. But I also heard you a question that Shashi gave me, saying how are we going to decide on the on efficacy? And I can tell you with Novavax what we're doing, and I think Oxford will be the same, which is basically we're looking to see the primary outcome measure is disease, and does the vaccine in the active group who've been given the interventional medical products, do they get less infection rates than those given the placebo? And I think that will be the same with Oxford. It's okay going for antibody. It's okay for going for T helper cell, or indeed cytotoxic T cells. I suspect antibody is going to play a more important role. But what you're looking for is actually a reduction in disease. That's going to be the key thing that we will look for in a phase 3 study. Do we see reduced disease? And I think the other thing that's going to be interesting with vaccines is, do you get a reduction in disease and do you get no transmission? What we're looking for is both, isn't it? Reduction in disease and reduction in transmission. And I think you may well get that in younger people. I think in me, I suspect what you might get is just you might get less disease, but I possibly can continue to transmit it because of my immunosenescence. So I think we're going to finish up with a range of vaccines, which have different functionality. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
Thank you, David.
I do apologize for the technical difficulties.
No problem at all. So can I say a big thank you to all the panelists and a big thank you to all the people who have logged on the webinar. I would like to say, before we finish, as Dr. Arun Wadhwa says, follow the 3 Ws. Wash your hand, wear mask, and watch your distance. If you do all these things, you're likely to be safe and you're less likely to transmit infection from one person to the other. Good night and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hari.